Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. Obviously, you're in administering adds, drops, and withdrawals. You know, I've been to this conference several times. This is the first time I've ever been in this room and not been in the balcony. But we're going to talk a little bit today about adds, drops, and withdrawal. We'll talk about that and how the impacts of that as far as the federal Pell Grant. We'll give you a recalculation overview. I'll talk about administering Pell Grant and recalculations for modules, add drops, and how that affects or does not with direct loans. I'll go over some of our definitions as far as withdrawals, give an overview of that. We'll talk about what happens with schools that are required to take attendance and schools that are not required to take attendance, and how you determine which is which. And lastly, I'll give you, we'll talk a little bit about enrollment reporting. Just before I go on, to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a federal training officer in Region 3 in Philadelphia. I've been in this job for 10 years. I've been with the department for about almost 24 years. I have 6 adult children ranging in age from 31 to 24. They are all out of my house. Which is why I probably look relaxed today. They are all gainfully employed. It makes me even more relaxed. I have 7 grandchildren that I can spoil and give back to half of them, which makes me so happy, and that's kind of payback. Out of my 6 kids, we had them, they all went to post-secondary education. We had them, one in VOTEC. We had public 4-year school, private 4-year school, community college, and online. So we had a whole lot of different experiences as far as their education. I did FAFSAs for 11 years. I don't have to do them anymore because I'm certainly not going back to school, believe me. And so I appreciate what you guys do professionally, but also personally. I saw firsthand the hard work you guys do, so I do appreciate that. And now it's just my wife, who's a nurse care manager, and myself and our 2-year-old lab puppy at home. So he gets in a lot of trouble, but not like the kids did. So that's a little bit about me, and let's start in with adds, drops, and Pell recalculation. So as you're aware, you have to recalculate Pell every time a student's EFC changes. So if you get an ICER with a new EFC, you need to recalculate Pell. Pell has to be recalculated to reflect changes in enrollment status between terms. A student has to start all credits for which Pell is paid. If the student does not start all the credits for which their Pell was based on, then that's a mandatory recalculation. With schools, you know, you're permitted to have a Pell recalculation date as a means or a time to establish a time frame for students to add or drop courses to determine their enrollment status as far as awarding Pell. Schools, you know, we call it a Pell recalculation date. It's referred to as an add drop date, a freeze date, a census date, a lot of different terminology. Just for the sake of consistency, for this presentation, I'll just call it the Pell recalculation date. But obviously, you have different names for it. You have a lot of options with your Pell recalculation. You can have no Pell recalculation policy. You can have a policy where you recalculate Pell in the term for every add or drop of a course or occurrence. A policy for Pell where you recalculate based enrollment status from a single fixed date, or a policy of Pell where you recalculate to account for modules within a term. If a school does not have a Pell policy, a recalculation policy for Pell in a term, a student who begins attendance in all classes would be paid based on the initial Pell calculation, even if their enrollment status changed before the disbursement is made. We define the initial calculation as the first calculation that is made on or after the date that you receive a Department of Education produced EFC, expected family contribution. So you're going to use that enrollment status or projected enrollment status at the time for your initial calculation. The three components again are you receive an ICER from us with an EFC, an official EFC, and you have a documented or projected enrollment, and then you're going to calculate the award. So with each of these, I'll give you some examples. So here we have a school, Hometown Community College. You're going to see them a lot in this presentation. They don't have a Pell recalculation policy. They received Deborah's Pell eligible ICER on August the 6th. They do her initial calculation. She's scheduled to begin attendance as a full-time student at the start of the term on August 15th. Deborah begins as a full-time student, but she drops 3 credit hours on August 20th, 2018. Deborah will still receive a full-time Pell since you have to, this school, because they don't have a policy, they have to use the initial calculation. Here we have Margaret, same school, no Pell recalculation. Her ICER is received on August 6th. She begins attendance as a half-time student on August 15th. Just before she starts the term, Margaret adds 2 more classes. So now, as of August 15th, she is full-time, but because the school does not have a Pell recalculation policy and they're required to use the initial calculation, Margaret receives Pell at a half-time enrollment status of 6 hours. Next, we have Kevin. Kevin, it says Kevin's Pell eligible 2018-19 ICER on August 3rd, 2018. Actually, that should be his 1920, I believe, ICER. So this October, Kevin submits his ICER, and the school does an award based on Kevin coming the next year on August 15th, 2019. Kevin does not begin attendance in 2 of the classes, and he's considered half-time at the start. Now, in his case, you have to recalculate Pell because he's ineligible for full-time because now he's attending half-time. And again, Pell has to be based on the student's actual enrollment status. So again, with Kevin, he did not start enrollment in all the classes for which his Pell was based on, so you're going to have to do a mandatory recalculation. Now we have Hometown Community College, and now they have a recalculation policy. So their fall term begins on August 15th, 2018. Their Pell recalculation date is August 30th. So we have Sarah, who begins on 8/15 with 6 credit hours. She adds an additional course for 3 hours on the 22nd of August. So her enrollment status for Pell purposes is 9 credit hours because she added those 3 hours before the Pell recalculation date. We have Rick, who begins on August 15th. He's taking 12 credit hours. He drops 2 courses and for 6 credit hours on the 25th. So his enrollment as of the August 30th Pell recalculation date, he's at halftime. So you're going to pay him at halftime basing his Pell on those 6 credit hours. Again, now we have Estelle. She begins on August 15th with 6 credit hours. She adds an additional course for 3 credit hours on September 1st. But as of the Pell recalculation date, Estelle's enrollment status is 6 credit hours. So even though she added those 3 hours and she's now at 9, she added it after the Pell recalculation date, so her Pell is based on what her enrollment status as of that Pell recalculation date. Next, we have Joshua. Joshua's probably a senior, and he's figured out the system a little bit here, it looks like. Joshua begins on August 15th with 12 credit hours. He drops 2 courses on September 1st after the Pell recalculation date. So although as of September 1st, Joshua's at 6 credit hours, he was at 12 credit hours on the 30th. So Joshua's Pell for Title IV purposes is 12 credit hours. And then Joshua, when he realizes that, probably goes back to his friend and goes to the dorms and tells everybody what he did. So, when determining Pell eligibility, if it's a withdrawal prior to the Pell recalculation date, you're going to use the enrollment status established at the earliest of the date of withdrawal or of the Pell recalculation date. So if you have a student who withdraws prior to the Pell recalculation date, the school is going to use the enrollment status of the student at the time of withdrawal when they recalculate or calculate his Pell eligibility, when they look at his Pell. If the student adds a course after the Pell recalculation date and withdrawals, you're going to use the enrollment status established by the student as of the Pell recalculation date when looking at their Pell eligibility. So here we have Hometown Community College again. We have Zachary. He begins attendance on August 15th. He's taking 6 credit hours. He withdraws on August 22nd. His enrollment status for Pell is 6 credit hours. We have Natasha. She begins attendance on August 15th, and she has 6 credit hours. She drops 3 credit hours on August 20th. On August 25th, she actually withdraws from school. So, and her enrollment status on August 25th is at 3 credit hours. That's where she was on the 25th, and then she withdrew. So it was prior to the Pell recalculation date, so we're going to use her status when she withdrew. Now we have Amber, who began attendance on August 15th also. She had 6 credit hours initially. She adds 2 courses for 6 credit hours on September 1st. She drops all courses on October 15th, and her enrollment status is going to be 6 credit hours, because that's where she was at the Pell recalculation date. For programs offered in modules, if the student initially enrolls after the established Pell recalculation date, you must use the enrollment status from the later of the Pell recalculation date or when the school is able to perform an initial Pell calculation. So if this is someone that they started and you did not, they just started the module, your Pell calculation is probably not going to take place, obviously, until the student's enrolled in this case. So that's after the Pell recalculation date. So we have Hometown Community College again. In addition to full-length courses, they also have modules within the term. And we have Paul, who does not register or begin attendance at the start of the term. On September 15th, he decides that he wants to enroll in 2 modules of 6 credit hours. That's going to begin on October 1st. He begins attendance in both those modules, so his enrollment status for Pell is 6 credit hours, because although that's where he was when his initial calculation was made, and that was made after the Pell recalculation date. Now we have John. Interestingly enough, one was my son, one is my son-in-law, and I didn't even write this presentation. John begins attendance on August 15 at 6 credit hours. He decides to enroll in a module that's 3 credit hours on September 1st. The start of the date of that module. His enrollment status is 6 credit hours because he began attending on 8/15 at 6 credit hours. He added the other course after the Pell recalculation date. So that's for what would happen with a post-Pell recalculation date initial enrollment, which is a mouthful to have to say to anybody. Now, I'm sure probably all of your students, they file their FAFSAs on time. They never do anything after the fact. They never just submit a FAFSA in the middle of thing. I know for you guys, everything just starts and ends at a perfect little date. But for those schools that have students like this, where they do a FAFSA later in the payment period, and you receive the official ISR with an ESR after the EFC after the Pell recalculation date, you're going to use the enrollment status from the later of the Pell recalculation date or when you're able to perform an initial Pell calculation. So obviously you're not going to be able to If they submitted after the Pell recalculation date, that's the first ICER you receive with an EFC. That's when you're going to be able to do the initial calculation. So we have David. He begins attendance as a full-time student on 12 credit hours, but he did not submit a FAFSA, so he wasn't eligible for Title IV aid. On September 4th, David submits a FAFSA. You receive the ICER on September 6th. So at the time you do the initial Pell calculation, David's enrolled in 12 credit hours, and that's for his status for Pell, 12 credit hours. We have Bruce. He begins attendance as a full-time student of 12 credit hours. He also did not fill out a FAFSA. On September 10th, he drops 3 credit hours. On September 15th, he goes in, he submits his FAFSA on the web. On the 17th, you receive his official ICER. You do the initial calculation. He's enrolled in 9 credit hours. That's his enrollment status because that's where he was when you did the initial calculation, and that was past the Pell recalculation date. Next, we'll talk about, we've been kind of talking about administering Pell recalculations for modules. So we talked about calculations. Now we'll talk about administering Pell recalculations for modules. And often this is as clear as mud to people. And I know you don't have enough to do, so you have modules to do. I'm just amazed at when my one daughter started college 12 years ago, she went to a 4-year state college. They had 3 modules in the entire first year she was there for the entire school. By the time she graduated, got her master's and left in 2011, that school had something like 3 or 4 modules every semester and sometimes even more than that. So, that's just really taken off. I guess that's the way we're going. Modules, it's a great thing for schools to offer them. It's great for students, not so great for you guys, though, is it? So, for a school, it's acceptable for you to assign a Pell recalculation date for each module within a term. That recalculation date would only be activated in the event the student begins attendance in that associated module. If the student does not begin attendance in an associated module, you would use the latest active Pell recalculation date to determine the student's enrollment status. And when a Pell recalculation date is activated, all courses within the payment period or period of enrollment are considered when determining the enrollment status. So, as you probably figured out, we're going to have examples now. First, here's our school, Hometown Community College. Now we're up to their 6th or 7th Pell recalculation date, I think. They have a term. It runs from August 15th to December 14th. They have full-term classes that go the full term. They also have 2 modules. Module 1 is August 15th through October 16th. There again, I didn't write that, but it's one of my kids' birthdays. Module 2, October 17th through December 14th. So they have a Pell recalculation date for Module 1 at August 22nd. They have a Pell recalculation date for the entire term of September 5th. And then they have a Pell recalculation date for Module 2 of October 24th. So we have Joanne. This is the portion where we go from using my children as examples to my boss and former boss. So we have Joanne, my former boss. She's scheduled to ascend 6 credits in a full-time course. And she's going to take 3 credits in Module 1 and 3 credits in Module 2. She drops a full-time course of 3 credits on September 10th and the Module 2 course of 3 credits on September 20th. Since she began attendance in Module 2, you're going to use that Pell recalculation date of October 24th, and so her enrollment status for Pell is going to be 6 credit hours. Now we have Mark, my current boss. Mark's scheduled to attend 6 credits in a full-term course, 3 credits in Module 1, and 3 credits in Module 2. He drops the full-time course of 3 credits on September 10th. He never begins attendance in Module 2. Since he did not begin attendance in that class, you're going to use the Pell recalculation date of September 5th for him, for the full-time class. So his enrollment status for Pell is 9 credit hours. Typically, this is the kind of thing Mark does to us. Now we have adds, drops, and direct loans. Your Pell recalculation date or census date has no relevance when determining enrollment status for direct loans. Now, it seems kind of logical. It's a Pell recalculation date, not a direct loan recalculation date. But your census date, as far as direct loans, when determining eligibility, it's not really going to matter. For direct loans, you're going to determine the eligibility at time of disbursement. If a student is eligible, they're enrolled half-time at the time of disbursement, then they can get that disbursement. If they drop below half-time after you've disbursed it, they're fine. They were at half-time when you disbursed it. If they're below half-time, then you can't make any subsequent disbursements of that loan. But at the point when you disperse the loan, if they're half-time, they're fine. It's important that you do have to have a process to confirm that what their enrollment status is prior to disbursement, and that the student started at least 1 class. So a school that disperses direct loan funds up to 10 days prior to enrollment starts, you can do that. If the student's scheduled to attend at least half-time prior to disbursement, as I said, if the student begins attendance at less than half-time, they start a class, they're eligible. So if you do it 10 days in advance, they were enrolled at half-time, they are less than half-time when they actually begin class, but you did that 10 days in advance and they were enrolled at half-time, then they are at that disbursement. They can still, you don't have to take that back. They were eligible for that disbursement. You can't make any subsequent disbursements unless they reestablish eligibility by becoming at least half-time. And of course, you're going to repay their accordance if they actually left. If you disperse that and then they left, they're just going to repay that in terms, loan and conditions, and the terms on the promissory note. Now, if you're required to return loan funds and a return of Title IV funds because of student withdrawal, then any funds you have to return, then obviously you would have to return those. For early disbursements, if a student does not begin attendance, the school must return any direct loan funds credited to the student's account. So that's pretty much for any Title IV aid. If the student never begins attendance in any class, then they didn't establish aid eligibility. So for direct loans, if you disperse the loan, you find out the student never started. For any loan funds that went directly to the student, you're going to notify their appropriate loan servicer, and that way the department can issue a 30-day demand letter to the student. Basically, we say, give us our money back or make payment arrangements. Next, we'll talk a little bit about withdrawal dates. We consider in the department for program measured in credit hours, if the student does not complete all of the days in the payment period or period of enrollment that the student was scheduled to complete, we consider that as a withdrawal. Program that's measured in clock hour, if the student does not complete all the clock hours and weeks of instructional time in the payment period or period of enrollment, then that student was scheduled to complete, then that student is a withdrawal. For a non-term or non-standard term program, if the student's not scheduled to begin another course within a payment period or period of enrollment for more than 45 calendar days after the end of a module, the student ceased attending, then unless they are on approved leave of absence, they are going to be considered a withdrawal at that point. If a student ceases attendance, they withdraw from all of their courses in a payment period or period enrollment, then you have to consider that student a withdrawal for Title IV purposes, even if the student is still enrolled in non-Title IV courses. So a student that's in Title IV eligible courses and non-Title IV eligible courses, if they withdraw from all their Title IV eligible courses, then they're considered a withdrawal. And you would have to do an R2T4 calculation. The goal of the return of Title IV provisions, the reason we have those is to identify the date that most accurately reflects the point when a student ceases academic attendance. It's not there to maximize the federal student aid to the institution or the student, no matter what the student tells you. That's not what it's there for. So we have two types of schools. Schools that are required to take attendance and those that aren't. If an outside entity or organization requires you to take attendance, or your school has its own requirement that instructors take attendance, or there's some sort of outside entity, organization that has a requirement that can only be met by you taking attendance, then you're a school that is required to take attendance. So you could be required to take attendance for an entire school, for a department, or for a program. You can have a school where you have some programs where attendance is required and other programs where they're not required to take attendance. If you're a school that's required to take attendance, you have to use the official attendance records to determine the withdrawal date. And the last date of attendance must be the withdrawal date. So it's a little more complicated, obviously, for schools that are not required to take attendance. We consider you not to be required to take attendance if no one is requiring you, there's no outside organization or entity that's requiring you to take attendance, and your school has no formal policy to take attendance. And that is most traditional credit hour schools. They usually fall into this category. The official withdrawal date would be the date the student began the school's official withdrawal process, or the date the student provided official notice. Official notification, we see that's provided to a designated school official in an official capacity. It can be provided either in written form or electronic via email or orally. And if someone tells you they're going to withdraw, then you're going to document that. If both dates are triggered, you're going to use the earlier date. And generally that's probably going to be when they notified somebody, but not necessarily so. If a student began the official withdrawal date or the official process and they told someone, you're going to use the earlier of whichever date that is, should you know it. If you have withdrawal of a student due to circumstances beyond their control, the withdrawal date can be the date the circumstance occurred. So if you have a student that was in an accident or was ill, you can use the date of that. If maybe they lost a spouse or lost a parent and they couldn't return to school, you could use that as the withdrawal date. Obviously, if there's some sort of accident or illness and they still come to school but later withdraw, then you're going to use the date obviously when they actually withdrew, if they came to school after that incident. For administrative withdrawals, such as a student's been suspended or expelled or you canceled their registration, the withdrawal date is the date that you terminate their enrollment. Always a cherry subject here. When a student dies, you're going to use the guidance under the regulations in 66822 C14, and that says the withdrawal date is determined by the institution as to when the circumstances occurred that caused the student's death. So that can be no later than the date of the student's death unless the student withdrew previously to other circumstances. So if you have a student and they're in a car accident on August 15th and unfortunately passed away on August 17th, your withdrawal date would be August 15th, when the circumstance that occurred that caused their death. For schools not required to take attendance, you can use the midpoint of the payment period or a period of enrollment for withdrawals without notification, where you can't determine what the withdrawal date is. You can use the midpoint in the payment period or the period of enrollment for that student, or those students rather. You can also use the last academically related activity as the withdrawal date. So you can document, if you use documented attendance at an academically related activity, you can use that in lieu of any other withdrawal dates, whether it's official or unofficial. Students cannot self-certify when their last date of attendance was. You have to document that it was the activity's academic or academically related, and the student attended or participated in that activity. These are some examples of what academically related activities are. It can be a student obviously physically attending a class where they have an opportunity for direct interaction with the instructor and other students. If they submit an academic assignment and you have that, you can use that. Taking an exam, an interactive tutorial, or participating in computer-assisted instruction. Attending a study group that is assigned by the school. Participating in an online academic matters, so online discussion about academic matters. Participating or initiating contact with a faculty member to ask questions about the academic subject that they're studying in the course. That is considered academically related. And we also have some examples of what is not the academically related activities. I personally refer to the first two as the gym rules, because Jim was my roommate in college, one of my roommates, and he did the first two. So living in institutional housing only, not academically related. Participating in a school's meal plan, not academically related activity. In the case of Jim, who I still know and hang out with sometimes, his second semester, he realized he could not pass and that he was going to have to go home and tell his father that he flunked out of school. Jim's father was a brigadier general in the Marine Corps. Yeah, things weren't going to go well for Jim when he got home. So Jim decided, I got 2 months, I'm just going to live in the dorm, I'm going to go eat, I'm going to go party, and I'm going to go pull Craig's grades down because he's going to do all those things with me. So, Jim left. My grades went up. He later became a police officer, put his 25 years in and retired. But he did the first two. Little did I know one day I would be up talking about it at the time, but logging into an online class without active participation is not academically related. Jim didn't do that because God knows when we went to school there was no online anything. Participating in general academic counseling or advisement is not academically related. If you're just talking to an instructor or someone about academic counseling or advisement, that is not, because they're not talking about coursework. Jim didn't do that either, because you can bet if he wasn't going to class, he wasn't going to go talk to his professors and get counseling. If you have a student who began attendance and they've not officially withdrawn, but you find out at the end of the period of enrollment that they failed to earn a passing grade in at least one course, you have to assume for Title IV purposes that that student has unofficially withdrawn, unless you can document that the student completed the period. I call this the Becky and Deidre rule, after two girls I went to high school with, who basically they went to college near a beach. They would out party all night, hang out at the beach, go to class and sleep during the day. Apparently they did finish the period of enrollment with all Fs. So it's kind of, if you have a student and they failed everything, you have to determine whether they actually quote unquote, earned that F. And I guess you earn that F by just showing up. Next, I'll talk about the date of determination, also a very important date. That's the date you become aware the student ceased attendance. For a student who provides notification of withdrawal to the school, the date of determination is the later of the student's withdrawal date or the date of notification. So you're going to have a withdrawal date and you're going to have a date of determination. They could be the same date. They might not be the same date. Often they are not. So for unofficial withdrawals, if you're a school that's required to take attendance, your date of determination cannot be more than 14 calendar days after the last date of attendance. If attendance is not required, then within 30 calendar days from the earlier of either the end of the payment period or period of enrollment, the end of the academic year, or the end of the student's educational program, that is going to be your date of determination. Just some reminders about deadlines. 30 days from the date of determination, you have to perform the R2T4 calculation. You have to notify a student of any grant overpayment if they have one. Notify the student of eligibility for a post-withdrawal disbursement of a Title IV loan and request confirmation. 45 days from the date of determination, you're going to return any Title IV student aid funds, and you have to make a post-withdrawal disbursement of title grant funds directly to the student. Certainly you can do it earlier, but you can do it later than 45 days from the date of determination. And these are calendar days. 180 days from the date of determination, you can make a post-withdrawal disbursement of title grant funds credit to the student's account. Make a post-withdrawal disbursement of title loan funds. But to do that, again, to do a post-withdrawal disbursement of title IV loan funds, you have to receive confirmation from the student for a subsidized or unsubsidized loan, and from the parent for a Parent Plus loan before you can make that disbursement. Just a few enrollment reporting reminders. You are required to schedule a roster to be sent for enrollment reporting purposes from National Student Loan Data System, NSLDS, at a minimum of every 60 days. You have to certify enrollment within 15 days of that file being sent. And if you provide a response by batch file, then NSLDS will process that. They will send you an error acknowledgement file, and any errors must be corrected within 10 days of receiving that. And these, of course, these are your enrollment statuses. We'll also send out a late reporting notification. And I use the we because I work for the department. I don't send them. So just don't kill the messenger. But we send those out 22 days if there are no updates sent by the school after the roster file is sent. The notification is sent to the enrollment reporting contact, the primary contact in NSLDS, and either the campus president or the CEO. Schools that fail to comply with enrollment reporting requirements, you can lose a loss of Title IV eligibility, or a fine could be imposed. Generally, every year for about the last 10 years, late enrollment reporting issues as far as not reporting properly or not reporting on time, those show up year in year in the top 10 findings of compliance audits and program reviews. Reporting enrollment deficiencies, that's every year that's in the top 10. It's one of the common one between both of those, either audits and reviews. And I believe for FY17, enrollment reporting deficiencies and issues was the #1 compliance issue in program reviews. Lastly, these are the resources we have. For Pell recalculations, it's Volume 3, Chapter 3 in the handbook. In direct loan disbursements is Volume 4, Chapter 2. Volume 5, Chapters 1 and 2 Or withdrawals, that's volume, that's return of Title IV funds. The whole volume is dedicated or deals with just return of Title IV funds. The regulations for Pell recalculations, it's 690.80. For when a student does not begin, it's in 66821. Notification of withdrawal information is in 66822C. And the regs on date of determination are in 66822L3I. Every time I say 66822L3I, I feel like I should say hike, because I feel like I'm calling out a play, or at least say Omaha after it. So I watch way too much football, as you can tell. So with that, that's kind of our presentation. I'm here for any questions you guys have. I'll be glad to entertain your questions. And if you don't want to ask them now, if you're going to ask one, if you'd come up to the mic, please. And if you don't want to talk in the mic and ask a question, you can come see me at Ask a Fed. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I have some confusion between slide 36 and 39.
Okay.
Okay, so whether I am required to take attendance school or I'm not required to take attendance school. I always thought I was not required, but now I'm confused.
Okay.
So,
Well, if I've confused you, then my job's done here, probably.
No, I've been confused for 3 days. So, okay. On slide 36, it's talking about institutions required to take attendance, and it says institution that has its own requirement, instructors take attendance, would be a school that's required to take attendance. But then it says required attendance could be for an entire institution, department, or program. So my first part of my question is, we have a nursing program at our institution. Our students that are in that program, that are in second year, they have to go to clinicals. They're required to go to a certain number of clinical hours to get their degree in nursing. So is that a required to take attendance because the faculty has to know if they did enough hours?
For that program it would be.
So does that make me a required to take attendance institution?
For that program you're required to take attendance.
Well, that's what it says.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's for,
So that makes me an institution that's required to take attendance?
Yeah, and it probably should have.
So every school that has a nursing program is required to take attendance?
You treat that program as one that's required to take attendance. But if you have other programs that aren't, those you don't have to treat. We could have written this a little better, clearer.
Okay, so for that department, for nursing students only, I treat their attendance and R2T4 reporting in the method of a required to take attendance institution, but all my other students not.
Right.
Okay, so then on slide 39 is if there is no formal school policy to take attendance in any of the other programs, so if there's not a formal policy, then for all those other programs, it's not required to take attendance school.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I know one of the community colleges where one of my daughters went, the nursing program, they had to take attendance. She was general studies, they didn't. So that's just like your school. You're welcome. Come on up to the mic. Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
I feel like Steve Jobs today, except I'm alive.
I have a question about
I think. Yes.
A student begins attending and is eligible for a direct loan based on their more than half time. So whatever, something happens, and but the day that we go to disperse, they're no longer enrolled. They were charged for a higher enrollment, but they're only enrolled less than half time. So your slides say we cannot disperse that loan.
At the date of disbursement, if they're less than half time, no.
Okay, at all.
And not at all, not until.
So another presentation that I was in talked about late disbursement, and so I'm confused about that. Would we be? Would the student be eligible for a late disbursement, I guess? They began enrollment, say, full or half-time, but now they're less than half on the day of disbursement.
When they began enrollment, if they were half-time?
At least, yes.
At least, then yes.
So
Even
they
if
could get a late disbursement?
they could get a late disbursement. Let's see. I'm trying to think how to the easiest way or the clearest way to explain this. So, to get a late disbursement, they want a late. So they're no longer enrolled, and now,
Well, they're enrolled, but they're less than half-time.
okay,
So,
they're and is the disbursement for is it in the same period of
right. So
Yeah.
we're a two-term school. They start attending in the fall semester at whatever level. They're eligible for a direct loan.
Mm-hmm.
The day we go to disperse, they've already dropped down to, they're only enrolled now in 3 credits. They were charged for full-time or whatever.
Right.
But they're attending only in 3 credits
So
on the
they-
day of disbursement.
Yeah, so no, they would not be able,
Could they get a late disbursement?
no, because they weren't eligible at the time.
Could I read my notes about late disbursement from
Thank
the
you.
section?
Yeah, so,
So what I wrote down is, if they were at least half-time at the start of a term, but drops before we disperse, you can still disperse
yeah.
a late disbursement, but can't exceed the costs incurred.
Right. Thank you.
yes, yeah, you're right, I
So that
confused
is
myself.
true then?
Yes,
They can get the loan for only the amount of the whatever their cost was,
yeah,
but no refund, say?
right,
Okay. Perfect, thank you.
yeah. Yeah,
Sure.
it's,
You sure?
yes.
Okay.
If not, I'm Greg Martin, I'm in policy, no. I used to work. At the time, so they didn't, at the time that they would have dispersed it, they were eligible. Now they're not. It's, late disbursements that's why we have their whole, yeah, this one gets into the weeds because there's so many other little things. That's why we have the disbursement. Come by Ask a Fed. Be easier for me to, yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, I think this is, well, yeah, I mean, I think usually with late disbursement, a lot of times the student is coming, they didn't take a disbursement time, sometimes they'll come back later and say, I would like that dispersed. So it's, there's so many different kind of factors that figure in, that's also why I didn't do the disbursement one. Yes.
I have a question about when there are 2 modules.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you always use the latest of the PRDs. For example, the latest PRD would be in the second module.
If the student started in the second module.
If they started in the first module, they withdrew from some classes. Let's say they took 6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
They withdrew from both of those classes. But they did it after that PRD date for the first module. Then they started another second module, and they took 6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Will we use that second PRD date?
Yes, because they started that second module.
So since that is, we're using that second PRD date, and they're not enrolled in those first 6 hours anymore, they're only eligible for the 6 hours.
Yeah, it's going to be what their status is as of that second
So
post-withdrawal date.
in a sense, those students, let's say they passed our PRD date, so they're financially responsible. They're only getting the 6 hours worth of Pell, but they're really owing us for 12 hours. That is,
Yeah, that's,
I just wanted to make sure.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Thank you.
anything else? I'm here for another 24 minutes. Well, thank you all. Like I said, I'll be here hanging around, and I'm in Ask a Fed. I feel like a stand-up comedian when I go to that. I'll be here every day in the lounge until Friday. So thank you all for attending, and enjoy the rest of your conference.